The Grand Chamber of the Galactic Council fell silent as Ambassador Krellix stepped forward. His scales gleamed under the artificial lights as he activated the holographic display. Images of Earth filled the space above the council floor, showing monuments, museums, and crowds of humans holding signs that read "Never again" and "Peace for our children." "Honored members," Krellix began, his voice carrying across the chamber. "For 200 cycles we have observed the species calling themselves humans. What we have discovered troubles us deeply." He gestured to the images. "These beings are trapped in a cycle of suffering. They fight wars, then spend generations mourning the dead. They build statues to remember their losses. They write songs about the pain of conflict. They have created entire organizations devoted solely to preventing wars." The council members leaned forward, interested. Krellix continued, pulling up intercepted transmissions. "Listen to their own words. They speak of war as humanity's greatest failure. They teach their children that violence solves nothing. Their literature is filled with warnings about the horrors of battle. They even created something called the United Nations, a body whose entire purpose is to stop armed conflict before it begins." A representative from the Kynthian collective shifted uncomfortably. Ambassador Thelsera had traded with humans for decades, and something about this presentation felt wrong. But she remained quiet for now, letting Krellix make his case. "Their military forces are minimal," Krellix said, displaying charts and numbers. "Most of their ships are designed for system defense and stopping pirates. They have 43 colony worlds, yet only maintain 12 proper military stations. Their spending on weapons has decreased every year for the past 30 years. Instead, they pour resources into terraforming agriculture and medical research." He paused for effect. "The Viraxis Dominion believes it is our duty to act. These humans are struggling. Their colonies barely sustain themselves. Their people work harsh jobs on frontier worlds with little support. And most tragic of all, they lack the protection of a strong military power. We propose a humanitarian intervention. A quick, painless integration into the Dominion. We will give them the security and prosperity they deserve." Murmurs of approval rippled through the chamber. The idea seemed reasonable, even noble. Here was a species clearly uncomfortable with conflict, barely able to defend themselves. Who would benefit from Vrox's protection? Finally, Thelsera stood. Her voice cut through the murmurs. "Honored Ambassador Krellix, I must object. You have misunderstood something fundamental about humanity." Krellix turned to her, his expression patient. "Ambassador Thelsera, your concerns are noted. But the evidence is clear. The humans themselves say they hate war." "They do hate war," Thelsera said firmly. "But you do not understand why." She pulled up her own data, showing different aspects of human culture. "Yes, they build monuments to their dead. Do you know how many dead they have to remember? Yes, they write about the horrors of war. Do you know how many wars they have studied? Yes, they created the United Nations. Do you know what had to happen for them to decide such an organization was necessary?" She looked around the chamber. "The humans do not dread war because they fear it. They dread it because they know what they become when they wage it. They have spent thousands of years perfecting the art of killing each other. They have written books about strategy that predate spaceflight. They have fought wars that consumed entire continents. They built weapons capable of destroying their own planet, then had to learn how to live with that knowledge." Krellix waved a dismissive hand. "Ancient history. The humans we observe today are peaceful traders and colonists." "Peaceful by choice," Thelsera said quietly. "Not by nature. I beg the Council to reconsider this action. If you invade human space, you will not be saving them. You will be reminding them of something they have worked very hard to forget." But the Council had made up its mind. The Vraxis proposal passed with overwhelming support. Only 3 species voted against it, including the Kynthians. The rest saw an opportunity for the Vraxis to expand their empire while helping a struggling species. Everyone would benefit. 3 weeks later, the Viraxis war fleet assembled at the edge of human space. 3,000 ships, representing the might of an empire spanning 200 star systems. Fleet Commander Zaxthar reviewed the battle plan with satisfaction. Intelligence suggested the humans would surrender after the first demonstration of force. Perhaps they would not need to fire a shot. The ultimatum was transmitted on all frequencies. People of Earth and her colonies, the Vraxis Dominion comes not as conquerors, but as liberators. We offer you protection, prosperity, and peace. You have 72 hours to accept our generous terms. Failure to comply will result in humanitarian intervention for your own benefit. On Earth, in the command center beneath Geneva Station, Admiral Zhao read the message 3 times. Around her, officers waited for orders. The room was eerily quiet. Finally, Zhao looked up at her staff. Her face showed no anger, no fear, just a terrible sadness. "I think we are weak," she said softly. "They have watched us build memorials and think we fear battle. They have listened to our peace movements and think we cannot fight." She stood, walking to the window overlooking the city. "They do not understand that we built those memorials because we were too good at war. They do not realize our peace movements exist because we know exactly what we are capable of." She turned back to her officers. "Send the recall codes. All of them. Every reserve unit, every mothballed ship, every sealed facility. Activate Protocol Omega. Contact every colony and tell them to implement the continuation plans." She paused. "And someone wake up General Richards. Tell him the long peace is over." Her second-in-command hesitated. "Admiral, Protocol Omega has not been used since the Resource Wars. Are you certain?" Zhao looked at him with eyes that had seen too much history. "The Varaxis have studied our present and assumed it represents our nature. They are about to receive an education in our past." "Yes, I am certain. Humanity tried very hard to avoid this. We built a civilization dedicated to peace. We created laws to prevent wars. We taught our children that violence was not the answer." She walked back to her command station. But the Vraxis would not listen. "So now we must show them why we tried so hard to stop ourselves." Across human space, hidden facilities began to wake. Shipyards buried in asteroids powered up for the first time in 50 years. Weapons systems sealed under international treaty were unsealed under the Extinction Clause. Reserve soldiers received activation notices and reported without question. Factories retooled overnight, switching from civilian production to military hardware. The transformation was smooth, practiced, as if humanity had been preparing for this moment, even while hoping it would never come. Because they had been, every peace treaty included provisions for war. Every disarmament agreement included clauses for rearmament. Every human knew that the long peace could end, and when it did, humanity would remember how to fight. The Varaxis watched the military build up with confusion. Where were these ships coming from? Where had humans hidden this manufacturing capability? Why were civilians volunteering for military service in numbers that exceeded the available positions? Ambassador Krelix received the reports with growing unease. This was not the response his intelligence had predicted. Humans were supposed to surrender, not mobilize. They were supposed to welcome Vrax's protection, not prepare for total war. On Earth, Admiral Zhao recorded a message to be transmitted to the Vrax's fleet. Her words were simple. "You came to our worlds believing we were weak, because we built monuments to our dead. You will leave our worlds understanding why we needed so many monuments. You wanted to teach us about war. Instead, you are about to receive an education from the species that has been studying warfare since before we discovered fire. We tried to warn you. We tried to be better than our history. But you would not listen." She pressed send. The Vraxis would receive it in 6 hours. By then, the first human counterfleets would be ready to jump. The long peace was over. Humanity's true nature was about to be revealed. And the Vraxis Dominion was about to learn why humans had tried so desperately to avoid this moment. The Vraxis first wave approached New Hebrides with confidence. The small mining colony had a population of 40,000, mostly families working the asteroid fields. Intelligence reports showed 3 outdated defense platforms and a handful of civilian ships. Fleet Commander Zaxthar expected the colonists to evacuate peacefully within hours. He was wrong. The first indication came when a mining hauler, the Dust Devil, broke from the asteroid field at maximum acceleration. Sensors showed it was loaded with refined metals and heading straight for the Vraxis flagship. Debris dismissed the tactical officer. Some panicked miner abandoning his cargo? But the Dust Devil did not veer away. At the controls, Marcus Chen, 19 years old, checked his calculations one last time. He had crammed every mining explosive he could find into the hauler's cargo bay. His parents had evacuated on the last transport, and he had volunteered to stay behind with the defense force. He keyed open the general channel. This is for New Hebrides. Make them pay for every inch. The hauler slammed into the Vergus flagship's engineering section at 0.3 light speed. The explosion tore through 3 decks and disabled the primary reactor. Marcus Chen died instantly, but his sacrifice destroyed a ship that had survived 100 battles. The Vraxis first wave suddenly found itself without its command vessel. What followed was chaos. The colonists of New Hebrides had spent the last 72 hours preparing. Every civilian ship had been weaponized. Agricultural stations dumped their entire harvest of grain into space, creating a debris field that the Vraxis ships had to navigate at reduced speed. Defense platforms that were supposed to be outdated suddenly fired weapons that violated several galactic conventions on its proportional response. The station controller, a woman named Sarah Park, who usually managed docking schedules, coordinated the defense with cold precision. She sent freighters loaded with volatiles on collision courses. She directed mining lasers to blind Vraxis sensors. She ordered the colony's fusion reactors to overload, turning the entire station into a massive bomb if the Vraxis tried to board it. The Vraxis expected casualties. Every invasion had casualties, but they expected the colonists to surrender once the hopelessness of their situation became clear. Instead, the humans fought harder. A family of asteroid miners used their drilling equipment to punch holes in Vraxis ships. A teacher named Robert Kim piloted a shuttle packed with mining explosives into a Vraxis troop carrier, killing himself and 300 enemy soldiers. By the time the Vraxis secured New Hebrides, they had lost 23 ships and over 4,000 soldiers. The colony was destroyed, but every colonist had either evacuated or died fighting. Not a single human had surrendered. Fleet Commander Zaxter, now commanding from a cruiser, reviewed the battle reports with confusion. This was not how pacifists were supposed to behave. The second wave moved to Redemption's Gate, a more established colony with 200,000 residents. The Vraxis expected stiffer resistance here, but were confident their overwhelming numbers would force a surrender. They jumped into the system and found it apparently abandoned. The colony cities were empty, the orbital stations dark. They have evacuated, Zaxtar said with satisfaction. Perhaps they are learning. Then the trap closed. The humans had not evacuated. They had gone underground, into bunkers prepared decades ago, during the colony's founding, and they had turned the entire planet's surface into a killing field. Defense satellites that appeared offline suddenly activated, firing missiles and kinetic weapons. Automated gun platforms hidden in mountains and valleys opened fire. The Vraxis fleet found itself in a crossfire from 1,000 different directions. Worse, the weapons themselves were terrifying. Humanity had signed treaties limiting certain types of warfare, but those treaties only applied to wars between humans. Against the Vraxis, they used everything. Railguns fired projectiles that punched through shields. Nuclear-pumped lasers burned through armor. Autonomous drones that continued fighting even after their control networks were destroyed, hunted. Vraxis ships, like sharks. The battle for Redemption's Gate lasted 6 days. The Vraxis eventually secured orbital space, but at a cost of over 100 ships. They did not even attempt to land ground forces. The automated defenses would have slaughtered any landing force. Zaxtar ordered the planet blockaded and moved on, but the victory felt hollow. 2 colonies attacked, 2 Pyrrhic victories. This was supposed to be a humanitarian intervention. Back on Earth, Admiral Zhao watched the battle reports with grim satisfaction. They are learning, she said to her staff, but not quickly enough. She pulled up the deployment schedules. The first response fleet is ready. Admiral Chen will lead them. Tell her the rules of engagement are simple. Make the Varaxis understand the cost of this war. Admiral Lisa Chen, no relation to the young Marcus who had died at New Hebrides, reviewed her orders. She commanded 200 ships, a small force compared to the Varaxis fleet, but every vessel was crewed by veterans. Many had come out of retirement for this. They remembered the old wars, the brutal conflicts that humanity had fought before achieving peace. They knew what needed to be done. The first response fleet jumped into Varaxis space and immediately broadcast a message on all frequencies. It was simple and direct. You came to our worlds to save us from war. Let us show you why we tried to save ourselves when they attacked. The Varaxis defense station at Kilos Prime expected a normal engagement. Ship-to-ship combat, tactical positioning, the usual strategies. Instead, the human ships did something unprecedented. They ignored the military targets and went straight for the infrastructure. Orbital refineries, commercial shipping lanes, civilian communication satellites. Nothing was destroyed, but everything was disabled. The human ships moved through the system like surgeons, cutting carefully chosen targets. The Varaxis garrison responded. Of course, they outnumbered the human ships 3-1. But the humans fought differently than any enemy the Varaxis had faced. They used the gravity of planets to slingshot munitions at impossible speeds. They deployed chaff clouds that blinded sensors for hours. They sent false transponder signals that made one Varaxis ship fire on another. The UCS Thermopylae, destroyer under Commander Sarah Okonkwo, found herself trapped by a Varaxis battle group. 6 ships surrounded her, demanding surrender. Okonkwo looked at her crew. They were all volunteers, all veterans. She keyed the intercom. They want us to give up. Show of hands, who wants to surrender? Not a single hand rose. Okonkwo smiled. Thought so. She opened a channel to the Varaxis flagship. You wanted to know what humanity is willing to sacrifice for victory? Watch carefully. You are about to receive your first real lesson. She set the Thermopylae on a collision course with the Varaxis flagship, routing all power to engines. The Varaxis captain ordered his ships to destroy the human destroyer. But Okonkwo had disabled her own shields and diverted that power to the engines too. The Thermopylae accelerated beyond anything the Varaxis thought possible for a ship that size in the last seconds. Okonkwo transmitted the service records of every crew member. Names, faces, families. She wanted the Varaxis to know exactly who they had forced into this action. Then the Thermopylae struck the Varaxis flagship at point for light speed and detonated its reactor simultaneously. The explosion destroyed the flagship, 3 escort cruisers, and damaged 2 more. The remaining Varaxis ships retreated from the system. Admiral Chen watched from a safe distance and transmitted her report back to Earth. First strike complete. Enemy learned lesson 1. Humans do not surrender. Proceeding to lesson 2. Across Varaxis space, similar attacks occurred. Small human forces struck at infrastructure and supply lines. They avoided large fleet battles, instead fighting a war of 1,000 cuts. More importantly, they broadcast everything. Every battle was recorded and transmitted to Varaxis civilian networks. The Varaxis population, raised on stories of glorious conquest, watched in horror as human tactics proved devastatingly effective. Varaxis intelligence intercepted human military communications and discovered something chilling. The humans had established something called the Continuation Authority, a provisional government designed to continue the war even if Earth fell. They had created contingency plans that extended decades into the future. They had built weapons caches in deep space that would activate automatically if human worlds stopped transmitting. The humans were not planning to win this war quickly. They were planning to ensure that even total defeat would cost the Varaxis more than they could afford. Ambassador? Krelix received reports from the front and felt his certainty crumbling. The humans were supposed to be peaceful. They were supposed to welcome liberation. Instead, they were fighting with a ferocity and sophistication that the Varaxis military had never encountered. And worse, they were broadcasting human history to Varaxis civilians. Images of Earth's ancient wars, descriptions of conflicts that made the current invasion look minor. The Varaxis population began to ask dangerous questions. If humans hated war so much, why were they so good at it? If they were pacifists, why did they have so many contingency plans? If they valued peace, why were they willing to sacrifice entire crews for tactical advantages? On Earth, Admiral Zhao received Admiral Chen's reports and allowed herself a small smile. The Viraxis thought they were invading a peaceful species, she said to her staff. They are about to learn that peaceful and pacifist are not the same thing. We built our civilization on peace because we know exactly what war costs. And now, they are paying that cost. The war was just beginning, and already the Viraxis were learning their first hard lesson. Humanity did not dread war because they were afraid to fight. They dreaded it because they had spent 10,000 years learning how to fight better than anyone else. And they had hoped never to use those lessons again. But the Viraxis had left them no choice. Now humanity would teach them why peaceful species can be the most dangerous enemies of all. 6 months into the war, the Galactic Council convened an emergency session. Not to stop the fighting, but to discuss containment. 3 member species had requested asylum status, terrified that humanity might notice them next. The Viraxis Dominion, once controlling 200 star systems, now held fewer than 100. And 20. Their government was requesting mediation. But humanity had not responded to any diplomatic overtures. Ambassador? Thelsera addressed the council with barely concealed frustration. I warned you. I told you that humans do not fear war. They understand it. The Viraxis did not invade a peaceful species. They invaded a species that has been studying warfare since before they achieved spaceflight. A council member from the Pelion Union spoke up nervously. But the humans continue to follow the rules of war. They treat prisoners well. They avoid civilian casualties when possible. They even provide medical aid to wounded Viraxis soldiers. This seems contradictory. Thelsara pulled up footage from the latest battle. That is what makes them terrifying. They have industrialized warfare. They have turned it into a science with rules and procedures. They fight with precision, not rage. They win battles not through superior technology, but through superior thinking. Every move they make teaches the Viraxis something new about the nature of conflict. On the Viraxis homeworld, citizens watched broadcasts that their government could not block. Human hackers had infiltrated every network, filling them with Earth's history. The siege of Leningrad, where humans ate glue to survive rather than surrender. Verdun, where humans fought for months over a few miles of mud. The World Wars, where industrial nations devoted every resource to destroying each other. The nuclear age, when humans built weapons capable of ending their own species and then had to learn to live with that. Capability. The Viraxis had thought themselves warriors. But their history paled compared to humanity's. Their longest war had lasted 3 years. Humans had fought wars that spanned generations. The Viraxis celebrated their military victories with parades. Humans built monuments to remember their defeats and used them as teaching tools. Commander Pavel Volkov led a strike force to the Viraxis military academy on Trander Station. Instead of destroying it, he captured it intact. Then he did something that confused everyone. He forced the Viraxis instructors to attend lectures on human military history. Dr. Amara Okafor, a historian who had volunteered for military service, stood before hostile alien officers and taught them about Sun Tzu, Clausewitz, and Machiavelli. "We teach your cadets that honor in battle is the highest virtue," she said calmly. "We teach ours that avoiding battle while achieving objectives is the highest skill. You celebrate warriors who die gloriously. We mourn them and analyze what went wrong. You study victories. We study defeats because that is where the real lessons are." The Viraxis officers were forced to watch simulations of human battles. Not the glorious victories, but the grinding slogs. Stalingrad, where humans fought building by building for months. The Somme, where humans advanced into machine gun fire and died by the thousands for yards of ground. The resource wars, where humans fought over water and food with weapons that could have destroyed continents, but chose not to, because they understood the cost. One Viraxis instructor, Colonel Vexinar, finally asked the question that haunted them all. If humans understand war so well, why do they claim to hate it? Dr. Okafor smiled sadly. We hate it precisely because we understand it. You celebrate war because you have never truly experienced total war. We fear it because we have fought wars that consumed entire civilizations. Every lesson we teach is written in our own blood. Every strategy we use was developed by watching our own people die. We do not hate war because we are weak. We hate it because we know exactly how much it costs, and we know we are very good at paying that price. The psychological warfare intensified. Human forces began winning through acts of unexpected mercy. Avrax's battle group, the Pride of Conquest, was disabled in the Kepler cluster during a fierce engagement. Captain Vexenal expected death or imprisonment. Instead, a human medical frigate, the Florence Nightingale, arrived with a white flag. Commander Zhang, a medical officer, came aboard personally. We are here to render aid, she said simply. The Vrax's crew was too shocked to refuse. Human medics treated wounded Vrax's soldiers with the same care they gave their own. They provided food, water, and medical supplies. Then, 3 days later, they returned the entire crew to Vrax's space under a flag of truce. Commander Zhang delivered a message with the survivors. We do not hate you. We are disappointed you forced us to do this. War is a failure of imagination. We hoped you would have more imagination. That single act of mercy damaged Vrax's morale more than a dozen military defeats. Their propaganda machine could not explain it. Why would humans show compassion to enemies who had invaded their worlds? The answer was simple but troubling. Because humans understood that wars end and what happens after matters. They were fighting not just to win, but to build the foundation for peace afterward. Human POW camps became another weapon. The Varaxis government claimed humans were torturing prisoners. Then humans allowed Varaxis journalists to visit the camps freely. The journalists found Varaxis prisoners receiving better medical care than they had in their own military. They were fed, housed, and even given access to entertainment and education. Human guards treated them with respect, even friendliness. One prisoner, young soldier named Kickster, was interviewed by a Vraxis news crew. They are not what we were told, he said quietly. They do not hate us. They captured me after I tried to kill their commander. Instead of executing me, they treated my wounds and asked if I needed anything for religious observance. When I said I wanted to pray, they built me a small shrine according to our customs. The interview was broadcast across Vraxis space. Millions watched a human guard, Sergeant James Rodriguez, explain his philosophy. We fight the Vraxis government and military. We do not fight Vraxis people. This young soldier was following orders, just like I follow orders. When the war ends, we all have to live with what we did. I want to be able to look at myself in the mirror. The Battle of Sagan's Rest became a legend among both species. The star system had no strategic value, nothing worth fighting for. But the Varaxis committed a significant fleet to hold it, and humanity responded with overwhelming force. The battle lasted a month. Thousands died on both sides. The Varaxis poured resources into defending the system, certain that humans would not commit so much force to something worthless. After a month of brutal fighting, Admiral Chen ordered a full retreat. The Varaxis celebrated their victory, holding parades and awarding medals. Then, 2 weeks later, they discovered the truth. While they had been defending Sagan's Rest, human forces had bypassed them and captured 6 systems that actually mattered. The entire battle had been a diversion. Fleet Commander Zaxthar, studying the strategic maps, felt something break inside him. The humans had sacrificed ships and soldiers to defend nothing, just to make the Vraxis think it was important. They had fought with real intensity, real casualties, all to misdirect attention. What kind of species spent lives so carefully? Ambassador Krelix, now barely clinging to his position, met with Admiral Zhao under a ceasefire flag to discuss prisoner exchanges. He expected triumph or gloating. Instead, Zhao seemed tired and sad. She brought Dr. Okafor, who presented a lecture on human military philosophy. You studied our peace movements and our memorials, Dr. Okafor said. You saw evidence of a species that feared war. You were not wrong. We do fear war. but you did not understand why. She pulled up images of human history. We have fought wars that make your invasion look like a minor border skirmish. We have developed weapons that could end all life on Earth. We have written books, analyzing every aspect of conflict, from logistics to psychology. We have military academies that teach thousands of years of accumulated knowledge. She looked directly at Krelix. We built peace movements and created international law, not because we were weak, but because we were too strong. We learned that we could destroy ourselves if we did not create rules and institutions to prevent it. We teach our children that war is terrible, not because we fear fighting, but because we fear what we become when we fight. Every human grows up learning about our wars, understanding the cost and hoping they never have to add to that cost. Krelix listened in silence. Finally, he asked, "Why did you agree to this meeting?" "You are winning. You could demand our surrender." Admiral Zhao leaned forward. "Because wars end, and what comes after is more important than what happens during. We are not just fighting to defeat you. We are fighting to ensure that when this war ends, we can build a real peace. One where both our species learn from this mistake. You invaded us to save us from war. Instead, we are teaching you why peace is worth fighting for." The meeting ended without agreement, but something had changed. The Viraxis had begun to understand that they were not just losing battles. They were losing a fundamental contest of understanding. Humanity had studied war for thousands of years and concluded that avoiding it was the highest achievement. The Viraxis had celebrated war for generations and never understood what it truly cost. Back on the Viraxis homeworld, citizens protested in the streets, not against the war itself, but against the lies they had been told. The humans were not weak. They were not pacifists who needed protection. They were a species that had learned terrible lessons from a bloody history and tried to build something better. And the Viraxis government, in its arrogance, had forced them to. Remember those lessons? The education of the Viraxis continued, battle by battle, mercy by mercy, lesson by lesson. And slowly, the warrior empire began to understand that true strength was not found in the willingness to fight, but in the wisdom to know when fighting was necessary and the discipline to stop when it was done. The war entered its 8th month. The Viraxis dominion was fracturing, not from military defeat alone, but from something more insidious. Their own people were questioning everything they had been taught about strength, honor, and warfare. The humans had done more than win battles. They had won hearts and minds, even among their enemies. Fleet Commander Zaxthar sat in his command center, reviewing casualty reports. The numbers were staggering, but what troubled him more were the reports from occupied systems. Human occupation forces were rebuilding Viraxis infrastructure. They were providing medical care to Viraxis civilians. They were protecting Viraxis cultural sites during military operations. The Viraxis military had never done such things during their own conquests. "Why are they being kind?" his tactical officer asked. "We invaded them. We killed their people. Why did they treat our civilians better than we did?" Zaxthar had no answer. The humans were fighting a war on 2 fronts, one military and one moral, and they were winning both. On Viraxis Prime, the homeworld protests had grown from isolated incidents to mass movements. Citizens demanded answers. Why had their government claimed humans were weak? Why had they not warned the military about human capabilities? Why were human soldiers showing more honor than Viraxis officers? A viral video spread across Viraxis networks. It showed a human soldier, Private Maria Santos, giving her emergency rations to a Viraxis child in an occupied city. The child's parents had been killed in the fighting, not by humans, but by collapsing infrastructure during the evacuation. Santos had found the child, fed her, and then carried her 3 miles to a Viraxis refugee center. When asked why, Santos simply said because she was hungry and scared. That is enough reason. The Viraxis could not understand this. Warriors were supposed to be hard, ruthless, focused on victory. Yet here was a human soldier, exhausted from battle, wasting time and resources on an enemy child. And somehow, this act of compassion was more demoralizing than any military defeat. "Ambassador Krelix, stripped of his position, but not yet imprisoned, watched the news with growing despair. He had spent 200 cycles studying humanity and understood nothing. Now, too late, he saw the truth. Humans did not separate their moral values from their military actions. They fought with both simultaneously. It was not weakness. It was a different kind of strength. The turning point came at the Battle of Redstone Colony. A human settlement with 80,000 civilians had been surrounded by Vrax's forces under General Korvax. He demanded surrender, expecting the usual human defiance. Instead, he received a transmission from the colony governor, an old woman named Helen Nakamura. "General Korvax," she said calmly, "I am authorized to offer terms. Surrender now, and your soldiers will be treated according to the conventions of war. You will receive medical care, food, and eventual repatriation. Refuse, and we will defend this colony with every weapon we have. I do not want more death, but I will accept it if necessary." Korvax laughed. He had the colonists surrounded, outnumbered 3-1. "You demand my surrender? Old woman, I could take your colony in an hour." Nakamura's expression did not change. "You could, but the price will be higher than you imagine. We have been studying your tactics, General. We know how you think. We have prepared accordingly." She paused. "I am 78 years old. I remember the resource wars of my youth. I remember what humans are capable of when we stop holding back. Please, General, do not make me remember those days again." Korvax ordered the attack. His forces advanced confidently. Then the real defenses activated. The colonists had turned the entire settlement into a fortress. Every building was booby-trapped. Every street had overlapping fields of fire. The civilians had evacuated 2 underground shelters, and what remained above was a killing ground designed by people who had studied 1,000 years of urban warfare. But worse than the defenses was the ferocity. Helen Nakamura herself led the defense from a command bunker, directing forces with cold precision. She had been a military strategist during the resource wars, retired to colony life, hoping never to use those skills again. The Varaxis had given her no choice. The battle lasted 3 days. Korvax lost 60% of his force before retreating. As his ships limped away, he received a final transmission from Nakamura. "I told you the price would be high. We did not want this, General. We tried to be better than our history, but you would not let us. Remember that when you write your report, the video of Nakamura's defense spread through both human and Varaxis space. On Earth, she became a symbol of humanity's reluctant warriors. On Varaxis Prime, she became something more troubling, evidence that humans had been holding back all along. If a 78-year-old retired strategist could devastate a Varaxis military force, what were the human military professionals capable of? The answer came 2 weeks later at the Battle of Kepler's Gate. Admiral James Patterson, leading the human Second Fleet, faced a Varaxis armada twice his size. Instead of retreating or requesting reinforcements, he smiled. Finally, he said to his officers, "We can show them what we have really been building." The Second Fleet deployed weapons that the Varaxis had never seen, directed energy systems that could disable ships without destroying them, cyber warfare tools that took control of Varaxis navigation systems, kinetic missiles that maneuvered like fighters. Most terrifying were the autonomous drone swarms, thousands of small craft that acted with collective intelligence, overwhelming Varaxis defenses through sheer numbers and coordination. But Patterson did something even more demoralizing. After crippling the Varaxis fleet, he did not destroy them. Instead, he disabled their weapons, took their crews prisoner, and left the ships intact. Then he had human engineers repair the Varaxis vessels and sent them home with a message. "We could have destroyed you. We chose not to. Remember that choice." On Varaxis Prime, the government finally collapsed, not from military defeat but from moral bankruptcy. The citizens had watched their military defeated, not by superior force, but by superior thinking. They had watched human soldiers show mercy while Varaxis commanders showed only arrogance. They had learned that the species they invaded had been capable of destroying them from the start, but chose restraint instead. A new government formed, led by Ambassador Krelix, who had become an unlikely voice of reason. His first act was to request negotiations. Admiral Zhao agreed to meet on neutral ground, Geneva Station in Earth orbit. The symbolism was deliberate. Geneva, the ancient city of humanitarian law, where humans had once created rules to limit warfare, Krelix arrived expecting harsh terms, reparations, territory demands. Instead, Zhao greeted him with respect and brought Dr. Okafor to explain humanity's position. "We do not want your territory," Okafor said. "We do not want your resources. We want something much more difficult. We want you to understand why we tried so hard to avoid this war." She presented a proposal that shocked the Vraxis delegation. Humanity would help rebuild Vraxis worlds damaged in the fighting. They would establish joint military academies to teach both species. They would create exchange programs for civilians. They would share technology and knowledge freely. In return, the Vraxis had to agree to mandatory education about human history, with emphasis on why humans developed international law and rules of war. "You invaded us believing we were weak," Zhao said. "You saw our memorials and peace movements and thought we feared battle. You were wrong. We fear what we become in battle. We built those institutions not from weakness but from hard experience. We know what total war costs because we have paid that price. We want you to learn those lessons without having to pay in blood as we did." Krelix looked at the terms with confusion. "Why? We invaded you. We killed your people. Why would you help us?" Zhao's expression was sad. "Because that is the point of civilization. We could destroy you. We could take revenge. We could make you suffer as you made us suffer. But then what? More hatred, more conflict, more memorials to more dead. We tried very hard to build something better than that. You forced us to fight, but you cannot force us to abandon our values." She leaned forward. "Do you know why humans dread war, Ambassador? It is not because we fear dying. It is because we fear killing. Every human soldier who takes a life carries that weight forever. Every memorial we build is not just for our dead but for our living, the ones who had to do terrible things to survive. We dread war because we know the true cost is not counted in casualties, but in humanity lost. And we refuse to lose our humanity even in victory." The meeting lasted 6 hours. By the end, Krelix understood that humanity's greatest weapon was not their military technology or strategic thinking. It was their refusal to let war change who they were. They fought when necessary, fought effectively and brutally when required, but never forgot that war was a means to an end, and that end was peace. As Krelix prepared to leave, Zhao gave him a gift, a book bound in simple leather. "This is a copy of Clausewitz's On War, one of our ancient military texts. Read it, understand it. The first lesson is the most important. War is the continuation of politics by other means. It is not an end in itself. We do not fight to win. We fight to create conditions for peace. That is why we dread war. Not because we fear it, but because we understand it." Krelix returned to Vraxis Prime, carrying the book and the terms of peace. His people, exhausted and demoralized, were ready to listen. They had learned the hard way what humanity had tried to teach them gently. That true warriors know when not to fight, that real strength includes compassion, and that the species most capable of war are often the ones most committed to peace. The horror of the war was not in the battles fought, but in the realization of what could have been avoided. The Vraxis had forced humanity to become what they had worked so hard not to be, and in doing so, they had learned why humanity had tried so desperately to avoid that transformation. Some lessons humanity knew could only be learned through pain. They just wished the Vraxis had listened before the teaching became necessary. The Treaty of Geneva Station was signed on a cold morning in March, exactly 1 year after the Vraxis invasion began. The document was simple, only 20 pages long, but its implications would reshape the galaxy. Admiral Zhao and Ambassador Krelix signed first, followed by representatives from both governments. Outside the station, human and Vraxis ships maintained positions. Not as enemies, but as uncertain allies. The terms were unlike any surrender in galactic history. Humanity demanded no territory. They asked for no reparations beyond compensation for destroyed civilian infrastructure. They did not impose regime change or demand Varaxis disarmament. Instead, they demanded something more costly and more valuable: understanding. Every Vraxis citizen would study human history as part of mandatory education. Not propaganda, but actual history, taught by both human and Varaxis scholars. Every Varaxis military officer would spend 1 year at a joint academy, learning not just human tactics but human philosophy of warfare. Every Varaxis world would host a human memorial, not as a symbol of defeat, but as a reminder of the cost of misunderstanding. Most importantly, the treaty established the Institute for Prevention of Conflict, a joint organization dedicated to ensuring such a war never happened again. It would be funded equally by both species and led by scholars, not politicians or generals. Its mission was simple: teach the galaxy why peace was worth fighting for. Krelix looked at Shao as they posed for ceremonial images. "We could have destroyed each other," he said quietly. "Why did we stop?" Shao smiled sadly. "Because we learned the same lesson at different times. You learned it during this war. We learned it centuries ago, after our own people nearly destroyed our world. The lesson is always the same. Victory means nothing if it costs you what you were fighting for." The reconstruction began immediately. Human engineers arrived on damaged Varaxis worlds with equipment and expertise. Varaxis builders worked alongside them, learning techniques developed during humanity's own recovery from ancient wars. The work was hard, the trust fragile, but it grew day by day. On New Hebrides, now being rebuilt by a joint human Varaxis team, a memorial was erected. It bore the names of all who died in the colony's defense, including young Marcus Chen. Next to each human name was carved a Varaxis name, the enemies who had also died that day. At the memorial's dedication, Marcus's mother spoke to a mixed crowd. "My son died defending his home," she said, her voice steady despite the tears. "Those Varaxis soldiers died following their orders. Both died unnecessarily, because leaders failed to communicate, because species failed to understand each other. We build this memorial not to celebrate their deaths, but to remind ourselves why peace is worth the hard work of understanding." A Varaxis soldier who had fought at New Hebrides stood and spoke. "I killed humans that day. I thought I was liberating them. I was wrong. The human who killed my squad mate was defending his family. We were both warriors. We were both wrong. Let this memorial remind us that honor without wisdom is just murder with better intentions." The Joint Military Academy opened on Geneva Station, renamed the Academy of Prevention. Its first class consisted of equal numbers of human and Varaxis cadets. They studied together, trained together, and learned each other's histories. The curriculum was brutal in its honesty. Human cadets learned about Varaxis culture, values, and military traditions. Varaxis cadets learned why humans had created rules of warfare and why they followed them even when fighting for survival. Commandant Sarah Park, the same woman who had coordinated the defense of New Hebrides, led the academy with stern compassion. On the first day, she addressed the cadets with words that became the academy's unofficial motto: "You are here to learn how to fight. More importantly, you are here to learn when not to fight. Any fool can start a war. It takes wisdom to maintain peace. You will be guardians of peace, trained in war, committed to ensuring your skills are never needed." 5 years after the war, Ambassador Thelsera addressed the Galactic Council. Around her sat representatives from dozens of species, all watching humanity and the Varaxis with mixed fear and admiration. "The humans taught us something fundamental," she said. "We believed that peaceful species were weak and warrior species were strong. We were wrong on both counts. Humanity showed us that the most dangerous warriors are those who understand the true cost of war, and the strongest peace is built not on fear of conflict, but on mutual understanding." She pulled up statistics. Trade between human and Varaxis space had exceeded pre-war levels. Joint scientific projects had led to breakthroughs in medicine and engineering. Crime rates had dropped in both territories as security cooperation improved. Most remarkably, polls showed that 67% of Vraxis citizens now considered humans allies rather than former enemies. How did they do it? Asked the Pelian representative. How did humanity turn enemies into partners so quickly? Thelsara smiled. They did not. It was not quick, and it was not easy. But humans understand something that many species forget. Wars end, but people continue. The soldiers who fought each other yesterday must live in the same galaxy tomorrow. Humanity has always known this. They fought every battle with the peace in mind. They never let anger override wisdom. And when they won, they used their victory not for revenge, but for reconciliation. On Earth, Admiral Zhao retired and returned to civilian life. She spent her days working at a school, teaching history to children who would grow up in a galaxy changed by the war. When asked about her experiences, she rarely spoke of battles. Instead, she talked about the aftermath, about the hard work of building peace. One student asked her the question that many wondered. Admiral, why did we help the Vraxis after they invaded us? Why did we not punish them? Zhao considered the question carefully. Because punishment without education just creates more enemies. The Vraxis did not invade us because they were evil. They invaded because they misunderstood us. Our job was not to make them pay for that misunderstanding, but to correct it. Yes, they caused harm. Yes, people died. But adding more harm and more death would not bring anyone back. Instead, we chose to ensure their mistake would not be repeated. That is what justice looks like when you think beyond revenge. The wall of necessary sorrow on Earth had become a pilgrimage site for both humans and Veraxes. Visitors walked along the endless names carved into black stone, each one representing a life lost in the war. At the wall's center stood a dedication that captured humanity's philosophy. They fought not because they loved war, but because they loved what war threatens. May their sacrifice remind us that peace is worth fighting for, and that the hardest victory is choosing mercy after winning. Krelix visited the wall 10 years after the war. He had become a respected figure in Veraxis politics, known for his advocacy of human-Veraxis cooperation. He stood before the memorial, reading names, and wept. A human veteran standing nearby approached him. "Did you lose someone?" the veteran asked. Krelix nodded. "I lost my certainty. I believed I knew what humans were. I believed we were saving them. Standing here, reading these names, I understand how wrong I was. These people died because I was arrogant." The veteran was quiet for a moment. "I fought in this war. Lost friends whose names are on this wall. You know what they would say if they were here? They would say you learned. They would say that is what matters. We do not build memorials to make people feel guilty. We build them to make people remember. You remembered. That is enough." The conversation represented something profound. Humanity had not just won a war. They had won the peace that followed. They had transformed enemies into allies not through force but through patient demonstration of their values. The Veraxis had invaded, expecting to find weakness. Instead, they found a species strong enough to win and wise enough to build something better from the wreckage. 20 years after the war, the first generation who did not remember the conflict came of age. Human and Vax's children who grew up together, studied together, and played together. They knew the history, but they did not carry the anger. They inherited a galaxy changed by their parents' mistakes and their parents' wisdom. At the Academy of Prevention's 20th anniversary celebration, Commandant Park, now retired, gave the keynote speech. Your parents fought a war that should never have happened. They fought it well, but more importantly, they ended it better. They showed the galaxy that humanity dreads war, not from weakness, but from understanding. They proved that the strongest warriors are those who fight only when necessary and who know that every battle should be fought with the peace in mind. She looked at the audience, equal numbers of humans and Vraxis, and smiled. You are the children of that wisdom. You inherit not just the peace we built, but the responsibility to maintain it. Remember why your parents fought. Remember what they fought for. And remember that the greatest victory is the battle never fought. The phrase, humans dread war, had become a galactic idiom. When a species showed restraint, when they chose diplomacy over violence, when they built defenses instead of weapons, others said, "Remember, humans dread war." It was both warning and compliment, a reminder that those who most hate fighting are often the most dangerous when forced to fight, precisely because they understand the true cost. Admiral Zhao, in her final years, was asked to write a memoir. She declined. "I do not want to write about war," she said simply. "I want to write about peace. About the hard work of reconciliation, the daily effort of understanding, the constant vigilance required to maintain what we built. War is easy to describe. Peace is harder to explain, but more important to understand." She died peacefully at age 93, surrounded by family and former enemies who had become friends. At her funeral, Viraxis and humans stood together, mourning a woman who had fought to win, but lived to build. Her tombstone bore a simple inscription. She knew when to fight and when to forgive. May we all learn both. The galaxy had learned its lesson. Humanity had taught it through battle and through mercy, through strength and through compassion. They had shown that dreading war and being good at it were not contradictory. They had proved that the most peaceful species could be the most dangerous, not in spite of their commitment to peace, but because of it. And in the end, humanity gave the galaxy something more valuable than military victory. They gave it an example of what happens when a species refuses to let war define them. When they fight only to create conditions for peace, when they understand that the hardest battle is not against enemies, but against their own worst instincts, the war was over. The peace they had fought for had been won. And humanity, having once again proven why they dreaded war, returned to the work they did best, building a civilization where such wars would never be necessary again. Not because they could not fight, but because they understood that true strength meant choosing not to when possible, and knowing how to when necessary. The galaxy would never again mistake humanity's love of peace for inability to wage war. They had learned, as the Viraxis learned, that humans dread war because they are good at it, because they understand it, and because they know that the real victory is not in winning battles, but in building something worth protecting. That lesson, paid for in blood and tears, became humanity's greatest gift to the stars.